Hello YouTubers. In this video, I'm going to continue to demonstrate the latest and greatest standard in terms of validation when it comes to being able to collect, a non-circuit breaking validations. In the last session in this series, in the standard series, we talked a little bit about how we can turn all the validation errors, like give the engineers the capability and the ability to either break the circuit early if there's an attribute on the model that you're posting through your API, if there is an attribute that is not valid versus your ability to actually, collect all the issues in a report for these attributes on your model and actually report them properly in a standardized way, to your consumers. Just since then, a lot of things have changed a little bit. I'm going to show you here, what I've done just to make sure that you have the best possible documentation, the best possible materials to actually get you going with our engineering standard. So I updated the standard to actually have the right details for you. So if you start from validations in here, here's the validation section. There you go. From the validation section here, section 2.1.3.1, I tried to put as much possible details in here for you to basically see the mindset behind, validating, data that's coming into your system. What it means, what is this exception library, what is the capabilities that we need to put in there to kind of drive a proper validation, test-driven validation methodology and routine. How can I make the code a little bit simpler and easier for you so you can read it and also you can maintain it, and for anybody who's coming in to use your code to actually also to have the ability to actually use your code easily without any issues. And then I gave you here some examples, some real life examples. Here's, ID is required and how you're going to throw that exception. What is this, same exception as? What's the implementation of same exception as? And all the little detail that you can possibly dream of, to help you kind of get off the ground with a proper engineering framework that can actually support you, when you're trying to build enterprise level applications. In addition to this, if you go into one of my open source projects, OSSS, you will notice this. You will see that myself and a couple of volunteers, Area and a couple of other volunteers, they started actually upgrading OSSS into this new modern standard. So if you look at this code drop, for instance, you will see in here that I have changed my files to actually have in, all the validation rules for a student model already taken care of. You see how the code is a lot simpler now. You have, less kind of exceptions being thrown. You're a little bit in control. And then you have this tiny implementation here, which is, I really call it, it's basically the simplest, easiest way to implement a business rules engine in like 10 lines of code with C#. So all you really need to do is just you're throwing in there a rule and you're pointing to a parameter, and it's applying that rule to your parameter and basically adding the results into that engine. That's literally what a business rule engine is at its core. So there's that part. So there's code examples, you have code examples, and you have the documentation, and you have the theory. Like in the last video, I was showing you just a fast pass theory, of how we can implement this new validation standard. Today, I'm going to show you this in action, like the productionization of that theory that I've been talking about. If you haven't watched the video, the last video that I posted about the engineering standard, you will find it in the standard itself. You'll see links for it, and also in addition to that, you can go into the standard 005. This is the fifth video. It seems like a lot of people had some feedback for me, and I'm growing with you guys. You're teaching me things as much as I'm teaching some people some things. Go there and look at the links. I provided there some links for the exception library, RESTful sense, real life examples. I try to give you as much material as I can as humanly possible, so you can get off the ground running and actually succeed into building proper, standardized, world-class software. And just like I said with most of my videos, the standard is not perfect, and it never will be. It's a continuous journey, of learning and experiencing with, really, really hardcore big enterprise applications that handle billions of records and billions of dollars worth, of processing, along with projects that some people never have thought about before, along with open source projects that are just aiming towards making the world a better place, achieving the survival of the humankind and its evolution and fulfillment. These three goals there, is what we're trying to aim with all the software that we put out there, with all these content. The free content that I put out there is for you specifically, the person watching this video, to grow and succeed. And hopefully you can pass this forward and make the world a better place. Maybe in my lifetime I wouldn't be able to create something that is worth its while, but maybe you, the one watching this video, will take these teachings and you will take these standards and rules and actually, light up the darkness, put something out there that is useful for humanity, that can, put us on Mars or take us to the next level, solve our biggest challenges with cancer, or with, the coronavirus, or whatever challenges that is threatening the survival of our kind as species and our evolution and our fulfillment. Take that stuff and succeed. Don't just sit there and listen to it and not do anything with it. This stuff, I put a lot of time and effort into this engineering standard, so you don't have to worry about where to start. But just like I said, it's something for you to start from, but it's not it's not a holy book. It's not something that you're supposed to follow blindly without trying to question it and criticize it. In fact, actually, if you don't question it or criticize it, it will be a lot less valuable than it is today. Okay, with this really huge introduction being said, let's go back into back into the fire here, and let's go and to our project. Remember, a while back we talked a little bit about building an open source standardized social network that actually respects human dignity and deproductize humanity when it comes to consuming social media. In this video here, I'm going to start building a new capability, an API that will help me, save posts, like social media posts, in my database. So this is an API endpoint where people write in a post, maybe a joke or a meme, or, share a video or whatever the case may be, and they click post. I want to save that content in my database. And in order for that to happen, I need to build an API that will allow me to do something of that matter. So we're going to start from the bottom. I'm going to create a new branch. Do you see that new branch here? This is my standard in creating branches. Let me hide my face here just so you can see, so here's a new branch, it's users Hassan Habib brokers dash post dash insert. Post is the name of the model, and then insert is the action, and brokers is the type, the category of work that you're doing. So for instance, I'll give you an example. If you're working on, let's say you're working on a foundation service, so it'll be users slash Josh slash brokers dash let's say student dash add, or sorry, insert. Something like this. Maybe you're working on a foundation service. There would be foundations, plural, like this, and you speak the language of every realm. So instead of insert, it would be add, right? Let's say you're doing a controller. Absolutely. Let's go here and say controllers, the student, and then post. So you start with, basically it's users and then user in here, that user, and then in here we put the category of work, whether it's a foundation service or an orchestration service or whatever service may be, like we identified in the standard. And then in here you put the entity like this, and then in here you put the action. That's our standard of being able to write a properly, easily readable GitHub branches, so people can actually easily search for it. And it helps me a lot, especially working with multiple teams. If I'm looking for a particular feature, I know exactly what I'm looking for. Am I looking for adding a student or retrieving a student? Is it the foundation service that I'm looking at, or is it the processing service I'm looking at? Whatever it is, it'll be very easy to look through just doing a fetch from master or main branch, and then just search through the existing branches that are in your source code. Okay, so we're trying to add, let me just visualize things for you because I want you to understand this. We want to have a capability where you can add basically you have a social media page right? And you have this timeline in here. So that's your timeline, like this. Your timeline is going like this, and you have all these kind of different posts in here, and maybe you have your profile on the left side, and you have, maybe, some other news and details on the right side. And then at the top here, there's this empty page, this empty box with a button that says write a new post, right? So that's my new post in here. Here you go. This is my new post. So this says post, right? It's an empty box where you can write text along with other posts that have happened in the past. Like these are other things that people have posted before or things that you have posted before. So that's your social media timeline. And you want to post this guy. Sometimes you can add a button and it pops up like a little dialogue in here. So when you click post, it will pop up that little dialogue in here. And that dialogue kind of, here's a zoom out of the dialogue like this. So this is the action, and now you have, what do you have? You have a text box like this, a large text box like this, and maybe some action at the very bottom here that says, hey, let's post a social media content. So in here it says post, something like that. Okay, so this content and this action, in order for that to happen, we need to call some API, right? We need to talk to some API of some sort. So let's say this is your API here, right? And I want to be able, as soon as I click on that post, it will call that API endpoint through, of course, view services and then foundation services and then brokers, and hit that API, and API will be able to save that stuff into a database. And we're going to build that stuff together. I'm going to use the standard, the upgrade that I have in my standard, to kind of build at least these two pieces for today. And then in a special video that's about Taarafo specifically, we'll build the rest of it, and hopefully you'll find this a little bit useful. Of course, this video along other videos will be posted on both channels. So most of the projects that I work with, I usually just share the videos and share the code along, like, see, I'm sharing the standard and the C# coding standard along with all the videos that are related to a particular project. The same thing happens with Taarafo, the same thing happens with everything else out there. Okay. All right, so I have my storage. I want to build this stuff, right? And just like a lot of you may remember, if you have been, following up with me, in order for me to build an API that talks to a storage, I need a controller, I need a foundation service, just a basic service that talks to the database to abstract away this work. And then I need a database, right? So in here, I have a controller, and I have a foundation service, right? And I have a broker. No complicated business, just get the request, post it, talk to the broker, and then talk to the external source, and it's all good and dandy. No magic there, no problem. Let's start with this part here. I'm going to put these two on hold. This one would be pending. The one in yellow in orange would be pending, and the one in black haven't been started yet. Okay, and let's start with this guy, brokers. Let's go back to this guy here, and let's, so I already created the branch, so I'm just going to go here and open up Taarafo. Taarafo is an Arabic word that means get to know each other. Get to know each other. Okay, let's go ahead and, I probably did a couple of things in here. Let me revert everything. Oh, I was just cleaning up some stuff. Okay, that's fine. Let's upgrade all the libraries in my project here to the latest and greatest. So include pre-release. I really highly recommend. If you want to be supportive in the engineering community and you know where to start, download these beta libraries and try them out, because it's sending telemetry to the people that are publishing these libraries about any issues that you may experience in terms of how many people downloaded these libraries, whether there's a reported any issues about it. Because if you use a library, you're going to run into issues. And if you run into issues, you're supposed to do your due diligence and go report an issue about the library that you have. And this is what I literally do in most of the libraries that I publish. I get a lot of feedback from the good people around the world, literally wherever they are, whoever they are, and they help me kind of improve the functionality, improve the work in my libraries. And you should be doing the same. That's your way of evolving this software industry in a fast pace. Okay, let me upgrade everything in here while I'm at it. And I think this project is running on .NET 6, but let me just double check. Let's go here. If you go, how do you know, right? You could go to the properties area in the project. So the properties will tell you what versions. This guy is telling you I'm running on .NET 6. That's great. That's good news. Or you can do the nerdy way where you can go and right click and you just can go and say edit project. Where's that edit project stuff? Sometimes it likes to run away and hide. Here it is, edit projects. So in this edit project, you'll see .NET 6 right here. Once you see that good stuff, that basically means, yeah, you're in good shape. You can actually, proceed with the work that you're doing. Okay, so I upgraded this. Let's just rebuild everything and make sure our project is in good stand. Let's do this real quick here. Okay, everything is building fine, but that's not good enough, right? Let's run the test. Let's do .NET test. It will pick up everything in your system, including the acceptance tests, and try to run everything for you. So let's do that here. There we go. Boom. 3 tests passed. Everything is passed. Beautiful. Makes me very happy. Okay, any other issues? Nope, there are no other issues in your system. Everything seems to be good. I'm gonna go ahead just because we need to be able to kind of follow the new standard. Let's just go ahead and start. Actually, before doing that, let's here write an interface method. There's value task, right? This is how I'm gonna add capabilities. So here's value task, and this value task has a post and insert post async. For those of you who are not familiar, the language here is really, really important. I try to leave some sort of like identifiers. It's like DNA in the code. When you hear insert post, it's very different. When you hear add post, it's very different than when you hear post post. Posting meaning that you're talking to the controller. Adding meaning that you're talking to some business logic, foundation, processing, coordination kind of service. Inserting meaning that you are talking to a broker level because it's speaking native language for the external resource that it's dealing with. This one is dealing with databases, therefore ideally it will say insert async. Everything has a little bit of art in it that basically identifies why it's doing what it's doing and why it's named what it's named. Please go to the standard. I'm going to put a link in the description of this video so you just understand what that means. Okay, so here's an interface method that is supposed to allow me to insert. It will interface with the database, and then it will allow it to insert records into the database. That's great. Let's implement that guy, right? Let's go up in here and say public async value task like this, and here is a post, and this is insert post async. There you go. And then we're going to go and say, so the entity framework which we're using to interface with the database, they have their own strategy, right? They say if you have a post that's already been retrieved, already been persisted in the database, you don't have to call add again. So if I pull an object from the database, let me show you how the entity framework strategy is. Let's say this is your database, and you're going in here. Let's say this is your service, right? And your service is going and saying, hey, give me an object from the database. So we got that object from the database like this. So I'm taking that object back and I'm doing modification on it, right? In my standard, I want to say retrieve object, and then when I do some stuff to that object, I want to go and say update object. The entity framework will say, no, you don't have to do update object. That item is already being tracked. Instead, just call save. That doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for my unit level, unit of work kind of pattern. So this is why I do this scoping thing. A lot of people ask me this question, why do you do this scoping thing with using? I go and basically instantiate my own copy of the storage broker, like this. And it's scoped, meaning like as soon as that call ends, the scope is already, the instance has already been disposed. Some people ask me this question. Some of these topics are a little bit too advanced, but just bear with me. Some people ask me this question. They say, when you instantiate an instance like this with every call, that means you're going to make your own instance in memory. Yeah, but I'm using this term here, using, which is basically disposes that object as soon as we run out of scope. As soon as we leave that scope, it will dispose that object immediately. Okay, so I have this guy, and I can go here and say entity entry, which is what comes back from the entity framework interface. Here we go, and then I'm gonna go here and say post entity entry equals, and then await broker dot posts add async, and then I'm passing in the post that's coming from the outside world. Okay, so I scoped it. I'm breaking this because if it's more than one line, make a new line between them. It makes it easier for people to read what you're talking about. So I'm posting a post. I made an instance of my broker, and then I went in there and I added that post asynchronously. The last thing I want to do is I go and say await broker.save changes async. That's the same instance within that scope. And then the last thing I want to do, I want to go here and say return post entity entry dot entity, which will return the actual entity. This is like a wrapper around your post, and you already have that entity entry coming back from that post. Now we just want to get that post and put it back into our system. Okay, this guy returns an entity entry. We just want to get it back from that post. All right. Some people go and say, no, why don't you just return whatever you post? That's really a bad idea, because whatever the database did to your post, whatever it did, we want to be aware of that, especially if you're calling an API or something and the API is coming back with stamped timestamps or created by, updated by. Don't ever, ever, ever pass in an object and return the same object if you have what it takes to kind of get status about what happened to that object that you posted in. Don't do that. That's a bad practice. And while we're at it, it looks like I didn't do the right thing here as well. Let's do this here. Let's fix this. I can go here and say using var broker new storage broker configuration. Here's the AI coming in, kicking in the GitHub autopilot to actually do the work for me. And then let's go ahead in here and say return broker.posts, and that's it. So this is all also scoped. Okay. I'm doing this in its own PR, right? Because it's a good practice, you know, to break your PRs based on the components that you're delivering. What's going to be the name of my PR? It's going to be brokers, like this. And then insert, post. That's it. I'm going to go and push this into a branch like this. And I'm going to go merge my own PR. I'm doing this only for you. Usually I just push straight to master. But I'm doing this for you so you can kind of, you know, get a look and feel of how you're supposed to be committing code. So here's Taarafo code. Here's my, I'm going to create a new pull request here. Let's see. Here's my pull request. This is broker insert post. I'm going to create that pull request. I'm going to look at my files just one more time. Doesn't hurt. Yep. The spaces and the tabs that shows up on GitHub are huge. They're very hard to kind of, but anyway, here we are. So this is a PR. It looks good. Let's go ahead and merge this PR. You know, this is just for you to kind of maintain the purity of the code that is being merged in and the code that is being written in here. Okay, so that's the post piece. That's fantastic. Let's go back to master and create a new branch. And this time things are going to get a lot more interesting, because this time I'm going to show you, you know, what's it going to take, you know, to kind of handle all these different kinds of exceptions that are coming in terms of the issues that you might run in terms of communication with the database, and how can we actually create a fully functional post test-driven industrial API endpoint that can actually handle posting objects through an API. Okay, so the second thing I want to do here is that I want to go to the services, foundations. I already have a post service in here. So I'm just going to go and do the same thing. Let's create a new branch real quick. And I'm going to go and say users, Hassan Habib, and then let's go to foundations, post, and then add, just like this. Here's a new branch. Now in that new branch, of course, you got to start with the interface. So here's value task, like this. And here is a post. And I'm going to go and say add post async, and it takes in a post object and it posts it to whatever that goes. Now we need a not implemented interface kind of capability. So here's control period. It'll put that guy at the top. All good and dandy. Not implemented exception. Perfect. Okay, let's pull the system attribute in here. We should be all good right now. Okay, so that's that. Now we need to write a failing test, right? In order for this to actually work and be actually truly test driven, we need to write a failing test. Let's go ahead and do that. Before I write a failing test, I need to be able to generate random post, right? So I have create post filler, but it's being used to generate multiple posts. I need a new one in here, private static. Let's go back here, private static, and then post, and this create random post. Just a random post, no magic there. Not doing anything with it yet. We're gonna evolve, but not just yet. So create filler. Here you go. It knows how to write the code for me. It's really cool. Okay. So this guy's creating a post for me. Let's go ahead and create a new file. We love partial classes. You saw here in the logic area, I basically written, you know, the retrieve. I'm gonna turn that logic into logic dot retrieve all, just like this. And I'm going to create a new file, a new partial class. Sometimes you're going to have multiple methods in the same file. It's always nice to kind of categorize and make things look right. So there's another logic file, but this logic file will say add, just like this. Okay, now you might find some errors in here because there are two tests with the same name. We'll take care of that real quick. Okay, let's write a test. Let's write a failing test that says you're supposed to be calling the database and you're supposed to be posting that object through your database. Let's go ahead in here and say fact. Here we go. And then public async task should add post async. Here you go. So here's and just like every test we do, we have a given, we have a when, we have a then, just like this. And here's a post, random post, create random post, like this. And then here's another post, which is the input post, right? So that's coming from random post, right? And then out of the input post, I already posted it. So let's call this one storage post. So that whatever I posted in there should match the post. So these variables, they are the same. And for the most part, they carry the same reference for the most part. But we're changing them. We're changing the names for them so they fit the rhythm of the code that you're working with. So okay, so here's post, and this is expected post. From storage post to expected post, all good and dandy. Now let's go to the setup, right? We're gonna go here and say, this storage broker that I have, let's set this up, and this is my broker. Oops, broker. Broker.insert post async, which is the function. I forgot to pull from master. Let me put this on hold for a second. Let me stash all of this. Let's see, stash all. So I'm stashing all of that stuff. And then I'm going to pull from master. I forgot to pull from master, my bad. So get pull origin master. Already up to date. If I do control log 1, it'll say pull request, which is okay, perfect. Let me unstash things. Let's unstash things. Apply all as unstage. It's okay. I'm bringing back all the stuff. And I'm going back to this test project that I have, which is the add. I should have here insert post in my broker, technically. Insert post async. And that's my input post. And that guy should returns async the storage post. Look how crazy this thing is. It knows what I'm talking about. It's beautiful. But it still doesn't recognize this guy. Let's see why it's not recognizing this guy. This is my storage broker. Did I not... Let's see. Oh, it did not really, pull from master. That's odd. Why did it not pull from master? Let's try this again. Get pull origin master. Get pull origin. Get fetch. Get log 1. Insert post. So I see the insert post in here, but I'm not seeing it in my code. We must have missed something because I don't see it in here. It's not visible. Let's go back to our source control and see what happened. Refresh. Did I not merge my code? Closed. Insert post. Taarafo core merged in. The code has the insert post async. Did I not? Let's see. Public async, insert post async. All of this is good. That's odd. Let's look at the master branch. Brokers, storages. iStorage broker posts. It's all good and dandy here. Okay, let me do a whip kind of commit, and let me try to pull again from master. That's really weird. What if I just reloaded my project? Would that work? Let's see. Unload. Well, it's a beta version of kind of Visual Studio, so it might act a little weird. Uh, Let me go back to the master branch here. And let's pull again. I should see something in here. What's the output here? Yeah, that's one of these odd things that happen, but we're gonna have to fix it. Clear, git pull, origin, master. That is one odd issue that we have. What about this guy? So this guy, did I forget to add an interface? Is that what it is? Ah, it's my bad. I'm sorry. So I forget to add an interface, and that's why it's not able to kind of, that's my bad. Okay. Okay, cool. Let's go back to our branch. Just a little issue that we found. See, because you're test driving things, you're gonna run. It's impossible that you will miss something like this, even if you forgot about it. You know, you will eventually run into it while you're test driving because you rely on your interface to kind of mock the contract. And if you don't have that, insert post async. So the implementation, I wrote the implementation, but I didn't write the interface. My bad. Let's fix this. Okay, so this is this guy. This is post add. So this is add in here. Okay, so now I can mock this. So insert post async. That's my guy. And then I'm gonna go here and say actual post. So I did expected post up there. Now I want to deal with actual post, which will come from this dot service dot post add post async. And that would be your input post. Now be careful here. You see this part here, this is also a new change to our standard. You need this, you know, you see this little tiny expected post that I have in here that I said equivalent to storage post. Some really smart person on one of the teams that I'm working with went ahead and said we should probably dereference this, like basically create your own clone of this, just in case your function decided, like when you pass this input post in here, if your function just decided to change the content of this, you won't be any wiser. You won't be able to tell because they all share the same reference. So make sure that your expected post is dereferenced so you are able to kind of catch anything funny that your method is doing underneath that logic to the original post that's coming in. Very, very smart. I really appreciate the people that I work with. They are my inspiration, as usual. Okay, so now let's go ahead and say, well, actual post should, I'm using here fluent assertions, should be equivalent to expected post. Expected post, just like this. All good, all good. The second thing, I want to verify that my storage broker has been called properly. Insert post async, and that's my input post, exactly with the thing that this is a happy path. And then I want to make sure that this guy has been called once. The last thing is I want to make sure the negative cases are covered. So storage broker, verify no other calls, never happened. Logging broker, verify no other calls, never happened. Do I have any other mocks? Nope, not yet. We're going to add date time at some point in time, but this is here's where I am. So that's a properly organized, standardized failing test. At this point in time, up until now, with the latest and greatest feature of our standard, this is a standardized, you know, business logic to add an entity in our system. Let's run this test and make sure that it's failing. Here we go. And a failure. Why did it fail? The method or operation is not implemented. Be careful, because when you're pairing with people, this light might go red. This indicator of the test passing or failing might go red, but it's not failing for the right reason. There is a failure that is a problem with your test versus a failure that's a problem with that's the actual not implemented or the problem with the implementation itself. We want to go with the second one. So please be cognitive of this piece. Now let's go ahead and commit this. So for every failing test, we make a commit. Whether you're going to pass this test to another pair or you're a lonely kind of person, kind of, building the software by yourself, like I'm doing right now. So you're going to have to kind of be pure when it comes to the commits that you're creating. So this is should add post async fail. Perfect. So that's that one. Now let's make it pass. Let's go make that test pass. How do you do? Right click on the business logic, the target, wherever you are, the win, and then just right click and just say go to implementation. The easiest possible way, so you don't have to scroll right and down and search for the implementation, all that. Don't do that. I see people do that. I'm like, why are you wasting time? Just add in these little hacks into your day to kind of reserve time and not have to do the same thing, because it's getting you tired if you keep looking for the file, or oh, where's the method and all that kind of stuff. Why are you doing that? Just jump straight into, and I think F11 also does that. I think F11, no, not F11. What is go straight to implementation? Go to Control F12. So if you do Control F12, it'll just take you directly. The less you use the mouse, the better when you're writing code, because that means you're gonna go a lot faster than the person that's having to move the mouse and point and grunt, right? Okay. So this is the stuff. Now I'm gonna just call my broker here with a fat arrow method for now. And I'm going to go and say insert post async, and that's my post. You can leave it as is like that if you want to do like carry a value task around until you really need it for execution. It doesn't give you really much advantage. It's case by case. I still have to see someone to come and tell me, Hassan, here's the difference. You could leave it like this and your test will pass too without async await, but we actually execute and materialize right away because we want to provide that upstream. There might be a point in time where we go and say, oh, we don't have to do that. There might be. I haven't run into that yet. Now let's go ahead and go back to the test. Again, instead of looking around into the files to find where your test is, just click on this really nice indicator here and then double click on this guy. I guess with the new version it doesn't really work as well. But what you can even use the reference. There it is. Finally it picked it up. Okay. So you can go here and actually run the test. Let's run the test. Let's see if our tests are passing. Fix this guy to not kind of bother me every time it runs. Here we go. Green. So your test went green. That basically means we've written a failing test, and then we wrote the implementation, and then we made that test pass. I can't convey to you, I can't press hard enough on how many times unit testing have saved me big time. Because whether you're, working late or working on a bigger project and you need to pay attention to a lot of details, unit tests will show you things that if you don't capture in the time of development, it might go all the way up to production and then it causes a huge mess. And then later on you discover, oh, I was assigning updated by to created by instead of assigning updated by to updated by. What's going to tell you that? Unit tests. Please consider writing unit tests. Adapt and believe in test-driven development in order for you to be able to write successful enterprise-level applications. Whatever really software you're writing, you have to kind of adapt to that. It's a great kind of idea to ensure the quality of code is at a certain level. So there's this pass. Now what's the next thing? The next thing here is that I want to go and say, if this here comes the validation piece, right? The validation piece. This is where I can go and say, I want to be able to throw a validation exception if the post that I'm passing into my code is null. It's invalid object that is being passed in. I want to just drive that, right? I'm going to go and create a class here, and I'm going to call it postservice-test.validations.add.cs. .validations.add.cs. So this is a partial class just like the rest of them. Let's add a copyright notice in here. If you do control period, it will pull it up for you based on the previous files that you worked in. And then let's write a test. Let's go here and say this is a fact. Here's another fact. So far, we haven't really touched our new standard yet. We're just doing very, very basic stuff. Okay. Look how this guy is trying to be smart. It says void cannot be found. You know, it's really, really smart, this autopilot stuff, but unfortunately not there yet. So task, and then we're gonna go and say should throw validation, should throw not found exception, validation exception on add, right? If post is null, and log it async. So this is an issue that we have here in our model. Don't worry, this line here is less than 120 characters, it's only 89. But because we're viewing our code in 175 kind of zoom for people on their phones, it gets a little bigger than like that. So I want to go here and pass in a null object. So I'm going to go here and say post null post. And it's really null. There it is, null. Right? But out of this null post, I want to go and say, well, then when this null post is passed, I want to throw null post exception. Right? So new null post exception. I don't have that exception yet, but we're going to add it. Let's go up in here in our models folder, under posts, under exceptions, under exception. Let's create a new exception type for that issue, and we're going to call it null post exception, just like this. There we go. And in this guy, it will basically inherit from exception, which is something that I will talk about in a second. All your inner exceptions have to inherit from this new library exception. I will explain to you in a second what that means. But for now, this is exception. I think I did I actually install this, or is it coming from with RESTful? I think it's coming from RESTful Sense. I don't know what version of exception RESTful Sense has as of yet, but let's find out. We can find out very easily, actually. Sorry, RESTful Sense exception. Oh, it has 1.3. We need the latest version. We need 1.6. So let's do that. And probably a little reminder for myself to upgrade the exception library in the RESTful Sense to kind of communicate the right details. So here we go. Just taking a second there. Here we go. Okay, so this is exception, and then this is the latest library, and I'm just gonna, there's no input to pass in here, it's just that the passed in object is bad. So I'm just gonna go here and say, here's my message, this is base. Here's my message, and post is null. That's all, that's the only message, there's nothing else in there. Nothing more or nothing less, just a simple message. Okay. Now I can use this exception that I created in my unit test and say when the post that is being passed in is null, then throw that null post exception and make sure you wrap that up in expected post validation exception, new post validation exception. Here's post validation exception. Let's see. Oh, we haven't even built post-validation exceptions. Okay, let's go build that one. So here's, because when we did the retrieve all, we didn't really add anything in there. So let's do that. So this is post-validation exception. Here we go. And let's just add some copyrights in there. And let's just go and say, I don't really care much for the outer exceptions, but I'm going to add them under exception anyway, because it's just good practice and more consistent. Now this guy's a little bit different now. This guy is actually going to take an inner exception like this. And we could kind of enforce that rule in terms of what kind of inner exception this validation is going to take. So let's just say, do this. Let's say if you want to pass in an exception to me, it has to be something that implements exception. This way you're actually really strictly saying, I can't throw validation exceptions and communicate that to any upstream services until you adhere to this new guy, because this guy is the one that's going to be carrying data points and all that kind of stuff. Or should we leave it generic? I think this is much better. Now, this is the constructor. I'm going to go up in here and say base. And then I'm going to go say post validation errors occurred. Please try again. So that's the message that I'm pushing with this. That's a message like this. And then in addition to that, I'm just passing in the inner exceptions. Are we over 120? No, we're not. It looks big, but it's not. You know, on my screen here, it doesn't in terms of scale, but this is where we're at, like this. Okay. Post validation error occurred. Please try again. We didn't violate our rule. We still, you know, within 120 lines. If you're really feeling icky about it, you can go and do this. That's okay too. I'm okay with that as well. No problem. Just make sure you take away the space from here. Okay. You will notice, okay, so this is all good. Let's go back here and go back to our unit tests, which is the validation unit tests. And now I have post validation exception where I can pass this null post exception like this. All good and dandy. And then I want to go and actually create the function that will make that call. So that's my post in here. And this is add post task. This dot service add post, and this is your null post passed in parameter. Okay, so this is all good. I have the add post, I have null post. It's all passed in. Now I need to verify that this exception was actually thrown. So I'm going to go ahead in here and say await assert throws async. What is it throwing asynchronously? Post validation exceptions. Let's take that guy in here. And I'm going to go here and say add post task as task. So this guy here, this statement here will basically take that task, this function here, and it will run it internally, and it will verify that it throws post validation exception. That's all it's doing, right? All right, what else is it gonna do? We basically gonna go here and say, well, you know, if that's what it is, then make sure that the logging broker, this.logging broker mock, this broker here, has logged errors. It is like this, right? And we're gonna go say same validation exception as like this, and there's my expected exception, and this should be called times once, just like that. Now what is this same validation exception as? This is why we're adding this exception library. I want to be able to go and validate the dictionary for some of these validation exceptions that are being thrown. So I'm going to take this existing expression function that I have in here, and I'm going to call it same validation exception, right? And I'm going to add a new line in here, and this new line basically will be, you know, first of all, when you write these methods, make sure you put the actual before the expected. So actual here and actual here, and then expected here and expected here. Actual always on the left side. So this is actual, actual, and then you have expected, expected, Control C, Control V, and then I'm going to go here and say actual exception dot inner exception, as this type, and then there's this nice function that says data equals. So this is part of this library that will go and say, well, make sure that the data equals, you know, the values that you have. Still 114 characters. I think we're in good shape. So now we're validating the data that's within this system. Okay? Let's go back here and let's continue this. So let's go back here and say, well, I'm going to go back to my validation for add, and I have same validation exception as. The last thing I want to do here is to go and say, make sure that the logging broker has not been called in any other way other than the ones that we validated. Make sure that the storage broker has not been called in any other way than the ones we're validated, and that's it. Now I should end up with a failing test in here. Let's run this guy here real quick. Here we go. Edits were made, cannot be compiled. Let's see, what is this? What is this hot reload stuff? Ah, there's like tons of these messages. That's just Visual Studio being. There were build errors. Do you want to say? No, I don't want to. Oh God, what is that? Okay, like 50,000 messages just popped up. And this guy's complaining about, oh, the acceptance list is complaining about the upgrade for the libraries. Okay, fine. Let's upgrade the libraries. So include, upgrade, update. Oh, that was horrible. That's what you get out of like using preview versions and stuff like that. You're gonna get some crazy stuff like this, but it's fun. You get to use, new fancy new technology, and you get to learn about it, and you get to help the people that are maintaining that technology basically write better software because you're reporting all of these issues to them, and then hopefully they will be able to learn from it and make the final product something that is actually usable to you. Okay, is there anything I need to update here? Let's see. Yeah, there's a bunch of things that we can update here. Let's update this guy. Always stay up to date with the libraries and don't ever try to put in your pipelines this auto update thing. I see some people go and do this in their pipelines. I see some people say, well, I want to get the .NET 6 and any upgrade, so I'm just going to go and do something like this 6.x or 6.0.x like this. And then things fall apart in the build and we have no idea why. This auto update thing, be very careful with that stuff. Really, really dangerous, especially if you're working on the bleeding edge side of things. If you're working with stable versions and you trust the framework and whatever is coming out and you just don't want to deal with compliance issues and security issues for, hot patches for updates for security, sure. But other than that, be very careful with that move. Very, very dangerous move. Okay, let's run our test again. Let's see if we have a failing test this time. So just to clarify, this test, what it's doing is that it's saying if you pass in a null post into my function should throw an exception that says, hey, there's a validation issue because whatever you passed in is null. Look at this. This is a good message here. This basically says, you passed in a null post. I expected you to throw a post validation exception, but no exception was thrown. Great. That's a good point for us to go and commit and say, just thin arrow like this and say fail like this. Okay, let's make it pass. So I'm going to go back into add post in here, and I'm going to do two things. Let's scope this first. Let's scope this guy first. And let's put in here return, await, whatever. This is all good. But now I need to add validation and I need to add exception handling. For those of you who are not familiar with this, we rely very heavily on partial classes because we believe objects in C# are 3D, right? 3D objects. If you're working with object-oriented programming, you have to consider the possibility that these objects have multiple dimensions, infinite number of dimensions. The dimension that I'm looking at here, this is why we use partial class heavily in our engineering standard, because the classes that, this dimension or this aspect that we're looking at right now, that's just the logic aspect. You're not supposed to see anything else other than the logic. The logic and the logic alone, so to keep you focused on what this function is doing. But if you care about validations or you care about exceptions, then you may go to another partial class, like you see here, they're nested under this class, beautifully nested under this class, so you can actually open it and see, I want to see the exception handling aspect of my service or my C# class. And we're going to build one in here right now that we're going to call the validations aspect of my class. Watch this. I'm going to go and paste this guy here, and I'm going to go and say it's postService.validations, just like this. Just like this. And it may branch further if you have many, many validations and a lot of business logic. I would question why you have too many and why they're all in the same place, but for the time being, this is that. Okay. You don't need, in your partial classes, you don't need to re-inherit again the interface, so you can get rid of this. But also you can go now and say private void validate post. And you're taking in a post as an input parameter, and you're running some validations, right? Okay, so I can write another method in here that says validate post is not null. And here's a post, and I'm going to go and say if post is null using C# 8 syntax, then throw new null post exception. That's it, right? Now I need to put that null not validation up here. So validate post is not null, and I'm passing that in here. Someone might say, why don't you just call validate post is not null directly into the method? Because we're going to add more validations as we go. We're just getting started. All right. When you see these three dots in Visual Studio, do you see these three dots under your method? That means Visual Studio is trying to tell you this guy can do something better, can be expressed better. And in this case here, it says it can be static. It can be static because it doesn't rely on any instance or private class member. It doesn't care about whether the class is instantiated or not. It doesn't care because it doesn't rely on anything that's relevant to that. Let's go back to our logic here, and let's just go and say validate post, and here's the post like this. Now, if I run right now, this guy's going to throw null post exception, but we still need to wrap that up in a category that's called a validation exception, because there's many inner exceptions that may come in with different issues, like post already exists exception, post locked exception, invalid post exception, many different little cases. And in our case here, we are just going and saying here is the validation for the null post. I still want to wrap this up in a category. To visualize this better for people, when I write exceptions, there are 4 categories of exceptions out there that we have identified, right? Some of them are hybrid, kind of hybrid, right? You can either throw a validation exception out of any service in the world, no matter what this service is doing. It's either a validation error or a dependency error exception, dependency exception. So there's validation exception, and there's a dependency exception, and there's a service exception. There's one there that I introduced that lives between the validation and the dependency, which I call dependency validation exception. Dependency validation exception. And this guy is just an indicator that a dependency has failed with a validation error, and we want to communicate this upstream. Okay. So that's my guy in here. So these are the types, and inside these types you can have multiple smaller exceptions. Think about these generic exceptions as carriers. They're carriers for multiple types of exceptions, and these types of exceptions are being carried across the journey throughout your application until they land in a safe spot where you are ready to communicate them to the outside world. The same thing in here, the same thing in here. Many different types of exception. What's an example of that? Just like I said, on the validation realm, you can go and say invalid entity exception, invalid entity, or not found entity, something like that, right? Not found actually, so there's not found exception, and then you can also have something like already exists exception, right? You can have all these kind of different issues, right? Like corrupt exception. The data is coming back is corrupted, right? Corrupt issue. Many different exceptions. And these categories, they basically carry these exceptions across your application until they reach to the controller level or the UI level, and then they unpack. They basically unpack. So you don't have to handle every exception down the road as you go, unless you really need to, and you need to take a decision and make an action based on the type of that exception down the road. Alright, so that means I can go back here and I still need to do a try catch, right? And that's a wrapper, that's another aspect in addition to validation and logic. That's the third aspect that we have here, where I go and say I need to create a small delegate in here. So private delegate, here we go, delegate, something that returns a value task of a post. Oops, like this. And this guy says returning, look at this smart guy, returning post function. like this, a smart AI thing. Now, what broke in here? I think we broke something. What did we broke in here? Create unlock critical dependency exception. Oh, do I have this copied somewhere? Oh, there's nested value in here. Yikes, that's bad. Sometimes this happens when you copy a class with all its dependencies and stuff. This happens. It's a very bad thing that, the IDE will do for you. Yeah, I think we're fine here. This one got me spinning my wheels once for a long time, and I had no idea that there's another nested class under the validations. It was insane. But okay, so here we are. Here's our code. So I wrote this returning post function, and I'm going to create that wrapper that handles the exceptions for me. So this is post. Here we go. And then this is try catch, and then returning post function. And here's a try catch. And I want to handle null post exception. Null post exception. And I want to wrap this guy up in a validation exception. Right? So I'm going to go here and say throw create and log validation exception with a null post exception like this. I don't have this function yet, so let's go write it together. Validation comes in first. So private post validation exception, create and log validation exception. And then here's my exception here, exception. And then I can go and say, well, wrap this exception that I just passed in a validation exception. So this is post validation exception equal new post validation exception like this. And then I'm going to pass in that exception in it, just like this. And then I'm going to go log it. So logging, log error. And here's the post validation exception. And then I'm going to return it like this, post validation exception. And then I'm going to return that guy, post validation exception, in my function, just like this. Okay. Now we kind of enforced a rule, and we need to follow that rule, right? And the rule that we enforced here is to basically go and say anything that is being passed in has to adhere to exception, and that's the change that we're kind of propagating as we go. So we're going to change this to say exception instead of exception, so that that type of exception has to implement this if you're basically creating and logging validation exception to make sure that you are able to communicate the right data at a type of exception that is, ready to kind of handle the serialization of problem details. Okay, now I have this. I can go here and say return await returning post function. If you're not sure how this method works, it's very interesting actually. It wraps up whatever function. It's a function of a function, and it wraps up whatever function you're using in a try-catch wrapper. So this way your cognitive resources, your vision doesn't have to be polluted with the exception handling that's happening and the mapping between external exceptions levels to local exceptions models throughout your entire application. A lot of people reached out to me and they said, Hassan, why are you handling that exception? Just let it propagate. No, we want to localize that exception. You have to localize the exception. Every model that's coming from the outside world into your application, you have to localize it. You have to turn it into a local model. And you can take it from that local model level and decide as you go whether you want to, make a decision based on it. Maybe you want to kick off a retry logic. Maybe you want to kick off an event of some type. But it's all localized, like it's protecting your core business logic from having to handle native exceptions. Right? Someone was asking me this question the other day. They said to me, Hassan, what types of exceptions are out there? I say, well, there is native exceptions, the things that get shipped with the entity framework, with .NET framework, right? These are native exceptions, things like argument null exception and system exception, and all of these, all of these different, IO exceptions. All of these come in shipped with the framework that you're using to build your application. So these are native exceptions. But there is also external or foreign exceptions, These foreign exceptions is the one that are imposed into your application because you're using some external library, right? So if you're using the entity framework, you're gonna get this whole, whatchamacallit, the entity framework exceptions, whatever they throw, they throw, oh, DB update exception and DB update concurrency exception. These are foreign exceptions. And these are very dangerous. If you let them leak into your business logic layer, like from the processing service and above, all the way up to aggregation, processing, orchestration, coordination, management, or aggregation services, these services should not know anything about these native or foreign exceptions. So what do? We pick up these native and foreign exceptions and we map them into localized exceptions. And these localized exceptions, these are the ones that we care about because these are the ones that we pick up and we basically go and say, any localized exception of any kind, this is the one that my business logic will be familiar with. So even if I change the entire framework around me and I change all my dependencies, your core business logic will remain untouched under any circumstances. Do you want me to draw a picture? Let's draw a picture. Let's see what this looks like. So if you go in here and say, this is your core business logic here, and you have these foundation services that are interfacing, they're just sitting at the border like this. These are your foundation services. They're sitting just at the border there between your actual abstract agnostic business logic and the rest of the system. Okay? And then on the other side of that border, you have your controllers. They're just sitting over there. Your controllers are doing the mapping out, and your foundation services are doing the mapping in from native and foreign models, foreign exceptions or external exceptions into localized exceptions. Are you with me? So there's this part. So these are your controllers and these are your foundation services. I'm gonna type in here just so you understand foundation service. Here we go. And on this side there are controllers. And these controllers, I call them exposures because they don't have to be controllers. They could be UI components. They could be, whatchamacallit, the GPRC protocols, WCF protocols, services. They can be anything. I'm going to call them exposers. Exposers, just like that. So these are exposure kind of components that turns your localized exceptions back into a protocol that is agreed upon across the entire universe in terms of communications, like RESTful communications. So it'll take your not found localized exception and turn it into 404 status code. You didn't invent 404 status code. That's an external contract that's happening with other services. So other services on the outside world can communicate with your service irregardless of whether they adhere to your standard in terms of naming conventions or not. Do you understand? So there's that part. Now let's go a little bit deeper in here and let's just talk about this. What these foundation services really do is that they pick up whatever chaos that's happening behind the scene here. There's a lot of chaos. You have the brokers, communicating with your external services, and it picks up that chaos and it turns it into a localized model. So whatever these models that are coming in, and whatever that, you have your internal services in here, let's say they're processing or orchestration services, whatever it may be. These services are the ones that have to kind of communicate with your services, but they have absolutely no idea about anything that's happening around us. So if the red is native or external, your foundation services are the gatekeepers. They protect your services. Let me do it like this. So they are half red, half green, because they take that red and turn it into green. Your foundation services are aware of these external models, but their awareness is only for the purpose of converting these external models into internal models. So these guys turn into green like this. So they take this chaos from the outside world and turn it into a consumable, locally consumable models, which means that this entire set in here becomes green. The opposite of this is what happens on this guy here. This guy here is the opposite. This guy goes like this, and it picks up your localized models and turns it to the other side. And so is this guy, and this guy, and this guy. So that's your exposure level, right? And the call normally goes like this. It goes from your exposure level models to a lower level model, and so on and so forth, just as we go like this. Let me select those. Let me move things down a little bit. Anyways, you get the point, right? So this is basically what we're trying to do here. And the same thing happens with this guy, and the same thing happens with this guy. They normalize, so whatever is happening within that realm of your business logic, it's all localized. From the top to the bottom, it's all localized. Nothing in there that is familiar. No SQL exceptions, no internal exceptions, none of that. None of that stuff has anything to do with this work that you're doing here. Okay, let's go back to our work here. So this is a try-catch pattern. I'm going to go up in here and basically pick up this guy and I go and say, okay, this is fat arrow, like this, try-catch. And here's async. I'm going to pass in this guy downstream just like this. So now I don't need this async anymore. So see this function here, this anonymous function here, is being passed to the try-catch. But when you look at it, all that seems to you is that this is just add post async. So you see how your exception is in one side, your validations are in another aspect because it's 3D model, and your business logic is actually in a completely different realm. Does that make my test pass? I don't know. Let's go and run the tests. We can run the tests from here and see how they do. There you go. So this one is a pass. Great. So we have this passing. This is the add, the validations on the add. You can't have this as null. What's the next step? We're going to take one next step, and then we can continue this journey in the videos that are concerning the Taarafo, just to be cognitive of the time of everyone watching these videos. So this is a pass. Okay. Okay, what's the next step here? I want to go write another test, and here where things get interesting. I want to go write another test in here. And that test will be a theory. It will have inline data. Let's focus the screen here on here like this. And it will have all the possible bad things that a string could do, because we know that our post model has empty data in it. So let's go up in here and say async task should throw this is where the new standard comes in. Validation exception on add if post is invalid, and log it async like this. Okay, so here's given, when, then, just like this. This is all good and dandy. And then we need to pass in string invalid text, just bad text in there. Okay, we need to create bad post, a post that has all the possible bad, data in it, right? Let's do that. Let's go up in here and say here's a post, and this is my invalid post equal new post. And this new post will have some properties in it. All of them are by default bad except for the content. I want to assign invalid text to it. So every iteration, with the test, it will try with a different invalid value for this content piece. How are we going to collect the bad data? We can make this a var since the right side is very clear. We can go with that. Let's go ahead and create invalid post exception. And I'm going to type in here a new invalid post exception. We don't have that exception yet, but we will. Okay. Invalid post exception is where all the magic is going to happen. Let's go back to our exceptions area in here. Here's my exceptions. And I'm going to go up in here and create a class. And the class is going to be called invalid post exception. Here it is. Let's add in the copyrights, control period. And let's go up in here and inherit from exception, of course, And then this guy here is going to be very simple. We're just going to go up in here and say the error here is you're not really passing anything in. All that you're doing here is that you're going and saying invalid post. Please correct the errors and try again. That's it. That's all I'm doing here. Let's put a little alias here since it's not clear what element I'm filling in, and let's clean this up. That's all that it is. Invalid post. Please correct the errors and try again. But where are these errors? Right? These errors are in the data property on that post, on that exception. And I'm going to show you how we're going to do that. Let's go back to the test real quick. And here's the exceptions that I expect to happen. Here's the errors that I expect to happen. So this is invalid post exception dot add data. And then the key here would be the name of the property that's failing. So let's start with them one by one. So post.id. And then the values would be something to the effect of ID is required. You can't just pass an empty ID in here. It's not going to work for using this API or interface. What else? The same thing, invalid post exception. See, I'm collecting all the report of non-circuit breaking issues. So here's my key, and then again, name of, right, post.content this time. And the values on this post.content would be text is required. See, I'm trying to stay generic so I can reuse the rule in place. See, I'm test driving this new standard that will help me kind of write code that is truly test driven, but actually also giving me the kind of capacity to go and, you know, return a full report about the issues that are happening. What else in here? The rest is just very straightforward. You know, invalid post exception. Oops, let's go back here. Invalid post exception dot add data, and here's the key. The key is name of post dot. What else other than content do we have? We have author, and what's the author here? It's a GUID. Okay, it's an ID. The values here would be ID is required. Because you already reported the parameter, the issue that's happening. We just want to add on top of that what the issue is. So the person that's consuming this error or problem detail at the end of the day knows what to do with it. Okay, here's another one. Invalid post exception dot add data. Here's a key. Name of post dot. I usually try to stay true to the order which I defined my my model with. So I started with ID and content. So I have created date, updated date, and author. Okay, author is at the very end. Okay. Why did I put author at the very end? That's kind of weird. Author is more like a non technically it's a non audit field. Technically. I think it's the same as created by, updated by. So I'm going to move the author up because it makes sense up there. Let's take on created date and updated date. Created date. Here's the values, the issues that I expect. And by the way, this is a param, like you can add as many as you want. Totally fine. I built it specifically to work this way. The only problem here, the key is complaining because of the parameter, so it expects you to pass in the values first and then define the key. But okay, this is the values. I'm only passing one, so this guy shouldn't be too angry. And then here I'm gonna say date is required, just like this. And then also invalid post exception, add data. I'm gonna go here and say key, name of, and here's my post, or like this, and then also updated date. And in here, I'm going to, again, go say the values and say date is required. That's it. These are all the issues that are happening in my post, in this object that I'm trying to post in, that are causing issues. Well, that's nice. Let's go ahead and actually run our code here. So I'm going to go ahead in here and say add post task. This dot service dot add post async with invalid post. Now I'm testing it. Now I'm executing the command, executing the run, and I want to see how far I can take this one in terms of, you know, getting that exception. So I'm gonna go ahead and say await assert throws async, and I expect that we're gonna be throwing a I forgot this one actually. Var expected post-validation exception. I almost forgot this one. New post-validation exception, because I need to wrap up my inner exception into this outer exception. That's my guy. And then now I just want to execute this function. So add post task.asTask like this. So this is all good. And then I want to go and say the logging broker mock verify that this broker here, log error, it is same exception, same validation exception as expected validation exception, just like this. And this is times.once, just like that. This log error, it is the same exception as this guy. So see how I organized my test here. I created an invalid post, created an exception, and I added all the issues that this exception is going to collect from that foundation service. And then I created that wrapper, which is post validation exception, passed it, passed the invalid post to it, ran the function, and then I said verify that these things have happened. What else do I want to verify? I want to verify that the happy path never happened. So I'm going to go here and say broker.insert post async. It is any post. Some people say, why don't you just use verify no other calls? Well, you're not really telling the story then. You want to say an error happened, and if it wasn't for that error, the happy path would have happened. In here I'm saying under any circumstances, this was called times never, explicitly like this, times never. And I think I'm missing probably one or two closing parentheses in here. Here we go. And then the last thing is basically us going and saying, well, after that, now verify no other additional calls have ever happened in this realm in here. All right, so this is all great. Now let's go ahead and run that stuff. Let's see how that works. I'm running out of tea. Maybe some water then. Here we go. And do I get a failure? There you go. So this guy failed, and if you look in the test pane in here, for those of you who see like the errors in that pane is too long, you can basically go up in the settings, this gear here, and you can just select wrap text and summary pane. It's very, very, very helpful and useful. So check this out. It said you said that you're going to throw a validation exception, but you threw nothing. So that means we have a successfully failing test. Let's go ahead and add this commit in here. So that's a fail. Like this. Let's throw away that stash. I don't need it. It's annoying. And let's go make this pass. How are we going to make this pass? Here comes the fun stuff. So I'm going to go back into the implementation, go back into validate post, and I'm literally going to write the simplest, smallest business rules engine you've ever seen in your life. Very simple engine that basically takes in dynamic rules and basically executes them and collects the report of information about that. So here we go. So I'm gonna write a simple function here. So private, here we go, private, right, static void validate. So far so good, right? And then I'm gonna add in params. What is params? Someone might say, what is params? I don't understand this keyword. What does it mean? Params really as simple as I can explain it to you. There's this nice REPL that you can run in Microsoft Interactive Compiler version. Let's say you have a function, and let's define that simple function called foo. And this function takes a param of strings. So let's say names like this. And then out of that, it goes and basically prints out these names. So string name in names, right? And then it can go and say console write line name like this. So I defined a function that can take infinite number of parameters, literally infinite number of parameters, without you having to worry about creating a list and then passing that list to that function. None of that. Check this out. If I go and say foo like this, I'm calling my function, and I go and say Hassan, and maybe Josh, maybe Vishu, maybe Kailu. I can add as many people as I want in here, and I hit like this. See, it's printing them. Oh, did I say right instead of right line? Okay, fine, whatever. So it basically picked up, so because I didn't do right line, it printed all of them together. But you see, normally this is much more dynamic and much more beautiful because you don't have to go like other people would have to go and do this. String array of names equal new string like this, and then go and add all these names again and again and again, like in another variable, and then let's say Ahmed in here, or maybe John or Todd like this, and then in order for this to work, now they have to take that extra step for passing in the names into that guy. That's really dumb. You don't have to do that in C#. You can use params. Params is much, much better. You pass in as many parameters as you want. It just works like a charm. All right, so that's a little side note here for parameters. So what am I passing infinitely here? I'm passing actually a list of validations, which a validation object has a rule and it has a parameter. And it applies the rule against the parameter value. Right? So I want a rule, and this rule is dynamic. Someone might say, Hassan, well, you keep throwing weird words at me. What is this dynamic stuff? Let's go back to the C# interactive. I'll tell you what dynamic is. If you go like this and say dynamic, x equal new, and you're just creating a random dynamic object like this that has a name in it, let's say Hassan, like that. Boom, you just created an object that's typeless. It doesn't have a type. It's dynamic, right? It doesn't need a type. Right? You can even take this a little bit further by going and saying, I don't know if they improved this in the, so you see I can extract the names in here. Whatever that name may be, I'm not bound by any particular contract. You can even take that dynamic a little bit further, but we're not going to do this in here. But I'm going to show you just for the sake of knowledge, right? Just so you learn for yourself. I can go up in here and define something called expando object. And let's call it y. That expando object is still just a dynamic object really in its essence. So here's dynamic dynamic y equal new expando object like this. Now watch this crazy. You can go like this and add on the fly properties as much as you want. I can go here and say add size equal 10, and all of the sudden y has a size. You never created a contract for it. You just created an expando object. An expando object is one of the most underrated, unpopular things in the C# world. It's amazing. You can do anything you want with expando objects because they're dynamic. You can add, remove from them. You can add whatever you want, remove from them whatever you want. Very, very powerful. Unfortunately, we're not going to be using expando objects in here, but we'll definitely be going to be using dynamic. So my rules are going to be dynamic in terms that they're going to have any number of properties, and I'm not tied to any particular contract. In addition to a parameter, and the parameter is basically the name of the thing that I'm trying to validate. Just the name, not the value. The value is being passed to the rule. And just like I showed you how to do params, these are called validations. So you see what I did here? So you just can see everything. I have infinite number of parameters that are basically a tuple of a rule and a parameter. And I'm basically taking this and going and saying var invalid post exception equal new invalid post exception. That's my bag, the collector that I'm going to collect stuff in it. And then I'm going to iterate on these validations. So I'm going to go and say for each, right, dynamic rule and a string parameter like this, for each one of these in this validations realm, if the rule dot condition is true, if the rule dot condition is actually true, then go ahead and pick up this invalid post exception and then add absert data. invalid. Did I define invalid post exception with exception? Yes, I did. Invalid post exception. Let me make sure. Do I have the right version of exception? Yes, I do. Maybe I just need a build or something. One sec. Let's build this. All good. Okay. And then invalid post exception dot upsert data list. Look at this. This upsert data list. This will allow me to add, just like I said in the previous video in the standard, this will allow me to add as many errors as I want against the same key in that dictionary, because every exception has a dictionary in it. But it's not that easy to go and basically upsert that key. It's kind of cumbersome, and I don't want you to worry about that. So this is why I added in this exception piece, exception with the X piece to kind of help you do that. So what am I adding in here? I'm adding in the parameter that I passed in addition to the value, and it's just one value. And the value here would be whatever the rule is, that message, because the message here is what's coming out of this validation that I ran in. This piece is really, really important. This is one of the most interesting pieces of code that I've ever written. It's a business rules engine at its core. That's literally what it is. Now, at the end of all of these iterations, I want to go and say, well, if you have errors, if you had added any errors, if any of these conditions have been met, and you had to add any errors, then throw if it contains errors. That's it, my friend. From line 31 to line 46. Give or take 10, 14, 15. 15 lines of code. A business rules engine. Now, how are we going to be using this business rules engine? That's where it gets very, very interesting. Let's write some rules. Let's go here and say private static dynamic, it's returning dynamic, is invalid. And I'm passing in an ID here. So I'm basically validating that the ID that is being passed in is valid. And if it's not valid, I'm going to throw a particular message that says this guy is invalid. Okay, because this is a dynamic object, I get to put in there whatever I want. We agreed that it's have to be a condition. So I'm going to go here and say GUID.empty. Right? And then the message here, like we agreed, is ID is required. I can add whatever messages I want in here. And I expand this model. I can expand this model in the future by going and saying, hey, I want to also add in help link to help people go through some documentation. So my site slash, errors slash 1234. You can send that and ship that all the way out to your API without any issues. What's even more interesting about this is that you can call in a localization broker, and it can pick up that text for you and localize it based on the person that's actually using your system at that point in time. The beauty about this pattern is that it allows you to expand and grow, not just solves an existing issue in the here and the now, but it's looking into the future and saying, hey, I can do better. I can do more with this. All right. So there's that part, and then let's write in more rules, right? Let's write in a bunch of rules in here. So private static dynamic is invalid, and it's date time offset, and that's my date, and I'm writing in a new rule, which is also a dynamic object. Beautiful. It's rhythm. It has its rhythm, and then in here I'm gonna go and say condition equal if this date equals default. Default meaning the default state of that date is not supposed to be. Then send in a message and say date is required. Just like this. What else do we have? We have the text example. Okay, I'm going to make it quick this time. I'm going to go back here. My apologies for the long video. And this is a text in here. And this is me going and saying string.isNull or empty. Is null or white space because it takes care of empty as well. And I'm passing in text in here and I'm saying text is required like this. So I created 3 rules basically based on all the types of models that I have. So I have created date, updated date. These are dates. I have content, which is string. And I have an author, which is a GUID. And I have the ID, which is a GUID. I think I have all the basic rules. Now I need to apply these rules to these particular parameters into my business rules engine. How am I gonna do that? Now watch this. Watch this. This amazing work that we can do here. I can go here and say validate. Validate like this, and I can start like this. I say rule is invalid. Right? What am I validating? Let's start with the ID. Right? So that's the rule because it's returning a dynamic object, and now I can pass the parameter, and that parameter will be the name of post.id. Can I repeat that pattern? You sure we can. Let's do this. Control, because it's param, so I can add as many rules as I want, as beautifully as I want without any issues, right? So I can go here and say, okay, what's after the ID? The content. Okay, let's add the content in here. What's after the content? The author. Let's add the author. Oops. I say author, but it sounds like Arthur. It's kind of weird. I'll do better. So here's created date, and then there's also updated date. How many rules do I have in here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 rules. Here's my business rules engine. See what we did here? Let's zoom out a little bit. I've added null. That's great. And then I added all my rules that I care about in a very clean way. It's very clean. You can see all the rules that are added in there. And then if you want to dig a little bit deeper into the rules, you can go and say, here's the rule for the invalid ID. Here's the rule for the invalid date. They all have the same name, but they are overloaded with different parameter types. And then you have that business rules engine that basically picks up these rules and executes it and runs it for you. It's all localized, so you can change it however you want. All open for you to kind of modify and work with that stuff. What's left? What's left for us is to basically run the test. Let's go ahead and run the test and see how life will treat us today. If I go and run, let's run everything. Always make it a nice habit. Like I see some people run only the one test that they're working with. That's a bad habit. Run everything. Run everything, see how everything is going to work for you. All right, and we have a little error here. Let's see what kind of error we have. This guy says, hey, let's see, ID is required, text is required, author ID is required, date is required, date is required. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have 5 in here. Did I say same validation exception as? Yes, I did. And let's see, as invalid text, it basically says it passed in an empty string and it couldn't make it work. Let's see what's wrong. So this is verify, this never happened, and then same validation exception. Where is this erroring out? It's erroring out at, if you click on these red lines, it'll tell you where the issue is. If rule.condition, assert data lists, pass in the parameter, and this is rule.message, this is good. This result here is good. And then the exception that we're receiving is, it says I expected an exception of type post-validation exception, but I received invalid post exception. Ah, do you guys know what the problem is? We never handled invalid post exception. Let's go do that. Let's go into the exceptions realm. See, we never handled that guy. So let's copy this guy here, and let's say this is invalid post exception. Like this, invalid post exception. Like this. Like this. That should make everything just pass for us at this point in time. Is it? Is it though? I don't know. Let's find out. Here we go. Boom. Everything is good and dandy. It's all passing. Let's run this across the project.NET test, including acceptance tests and everything else in between. I don't think there's much going on in our acceptance test yet because we don't have all the CRUD operations we need to run. But here we go. Passed 8, failed 0, execution time 50 millisecond. I will show you at some point in time. I think Estimizer has almost thousands, really. OSSS, it has thousands and thousands of tests, and it's running in like 48 seconds. That's how you know you're writing things right. You're really optimizing and writing something that can give you immediately feedback if something is broken. Okay, let's mark this test as pass, like this. Now there are other rules that I want to add in. So this is pass. Now, what about the other rules that are very specific? Like this is a fast pass. This is you saying default value that comes in outside of the box should report in these issues immediately, right? But there are rules that kind of different when it comes to this. Like for instance, when you are posting a post, the created date and updated date should be exactly the same. Should be exactly the same. How are we going to verify that? Let's go and do this. Let's go and say fact public async task. Watch this. Should throw validation exception on add if created and updated dates is not same, and log it async. 106 characters. I think we should be fine. Okay, so it's given when then like this, and then I'm gonna create a random post. This is post random post equal create random post like this, and then out of that I want to go and say invalid post equal random post. Why is this post is invalid? I'll show you in a second. Let's first go and say get random number. So this get random number. Do I have random number? Yes, I do. Perfect. I have that because I was generating a random list of posts for the retrieval on Taarafo. What am I going to do with this random number? I'm going to make the created date different from the updated date. So I'm going to go here and say invalid post dot updated date equals invalid post dot created date at add days, and I'm adding in a random number in here. So this way I change the value between these two. This line seems too long, going out of coherence with the rest of the group. I'm going to take it in its own kind of little thing in here. Now, what do I expect to happen in terms of errors? I'm going to go ahead and say invalid post exception equals new invalid post exception, just like this. But out of that, I'm going to go and say in this invalid post exception, the error that's going to come in is going to be very different. I'm going to go and say add data, and then the key here would be name of post dot updated date, because that's where the issue is. And then in the values, I'm going to go and say date is not the same as, I'm going to put interpolation here and say created date. This is name of post dot created date, just like this. And that's the only error I expect to come out of this validation rule. What's left? I'm going to go here and say expected. The rest is really the same as this one, really. So for to be considerate of the time, what are we on the time? Almost 2 hours. I'm sorry about that. So let's do this. So expected post validation exception, and the rest is just exactly the same. I'm basically going and saying you're going to wrap this up in a validation exception. You're going to run the post, and then we're going to run everything. Let's go ahead and run this, and let's see what the outcome is. This test, of course, should fail. There we go. It's taking a second there. Let me collapse the world just so we can see. Yeah, there you go. You have a failure. And the failure here says, well, I expected that I would receive a post-validation exception, but no exception was thrown. This is a very good message. This basically means the object that you passed in is so perfect based on the current rules that I couldn't find an exception to throw. Wonderful. Let's take that guy here and let's, commit this as a failure. So that's a fail. And let's go back in here and actually make it work. So we're going to add this new rule in here. Now watch how I'm going to change the structure of how to build rule. This is why I'm building this one, so you can see how rules can actually, be orchestrated very differently. So here you go. Private, static, dynamic is not same. Okay. So what am I passing in? Date time offset, first date. That's the date I'm validating with. And then date time offset, again, second date. And then here's a string for second date name. See, your rule is so dynamic, you can do whatever you want with it. See, unfortunately, Visual Studio won't let me keep the arrows, the squiggly brackets like this, but here we are. Right? If I do Control KD, it'll just do this. Anyway, I want to return in a condition. Right? So that's my condition here, and the condition is that first date, right, is not equivalent to second date. So they're not the same. And the message that I want to pass here is message. See, it's all kind of confused right now because I'm not Control KD. There you go. Fine. Okay, so in here I say date is not the same as, and here's some interpolation here, and I'm going to pass in here the second date name, just like this. Now I just need to add this rule. So because I have already the business rules engine, once you orchestrated a rule, now go ahead and pass it in there. So let's go down in here and say something to the effect of rule is not same. And what do I need from that rule? I need first date, which is post dot updated date, and then second date. I did updated date first because that's the thing that I'm validating, and then post dot created date, and then the last thing is second date name, which is name of post dot created date, just like this. And then underneath all that, I need to go pass in the parameter, which is going to be name of course, the updated date. Post dot updated date, like that, just like that. Control KD. We need a comma. We need a comma in here, and then we need to push that up by 1 like this. So see how my rules now are shaping up in different ways. There's the one-liners, just flat line, and there's the multi-liner that like you see in here. Okay. Does this make my test pass though? That's the question. Is this gonna make my test pass? Let's see. Control key E will clean up all these unneeded calls. Here is my test. Let's run the world. Literally, engineers run the world, man. That's the best thing about engineering. Everything is good and dandy. It's passing. It's happy. Wonderful. Great success, right? So that means this guy also passed. It's great. Let's go here and go and say, well, this is a pass. One more and we'll wrap up that session and everyone should be happy. The last one that I want to do here is to make sure that the date is not recent. You know what? It's very similar. You're just gonna call in the date time broker, and we're just gonna make sure it's similar. So I'm just gonna push this as a branch for now, because the second part of this video, which is gonna be a little bit longer as well, it's a completely also a new way of building things. So I'm gonna go up in here in Taarafo and create a draft pull request. How do I make it draft? Create draft pull request. And I'm going to go here in the name and say this guy is foundations, right? Add post. So here's a draft post. You can find this on taarafo.core. You're going to find this in these open kind of commits, open pull requests, and you'll see how clean even how we created this pull requests are. You'll see every single step: fail, pass, fail, pass. Actually, it starts from the bottom here. So this is where I go and say this is a failing test, and then this is how you make it pass. The commit history, our commit history, like following the standard. Like I said, the standard is a culture. It's an initiative. It's not just about how you're writing the code, but how you're conducting yourself as you are writing that code. How you're, working with colleagues, pair programming, or if you're working on a project on your own, how it looks like. How you write your code, how you commit your code, how you communicate your code, how you communicate with another team. All of these are standards. Like I said, someone asked me the other day, they said, what's the standard? And I said, there are many standards. There's business standards, how you go collect requirements from a client and turn these requirements into tasks and standardized user stories. Today you'll find people go all over the place when it comes to writing user stories in a sprint for people to be able to pick up these user stories and actually, implement them. It's all over the place, right? We standardize that. So standardize all the way from requirement gathering to designing, the design standard, to the engineering standard, which includes, how you write this thing that I'm showing you right now. That's the engineering standard. To the kind of team conduct kind of standard, how you pair program, how you create your branches, pull requests, how you name your pull requests, to the performance standard, which basically helps you understand where the weaknesses and strengths are across the team. All of this bundle of standards is what governs the entire software development process, and it's intentionally focusing on making the engineer its first-class citizen, treating it as first-class citizen in terms of how can I make the engineer's life more predictable, easier to work with. They don't have to go around looking for someone to help them. There's pair programming sessions set up for them to be able to sit down with someone to walk them through the problem that needs to be solved. We don't have silos. We don't have SAMs like the savior model kind of architecture where there's only the one person that knows how to do everything and the rest of the team doesn't know how to do anything. This is all part of this. The stuff that I showed you today is just another upgrade to that engineering standard. But that engineering standard is just a little circle in many, many other circles that will govern the engineering process. Unfortunately, most of that stuff at this point in time either lives in code and lives in the minds and the hearts of the people that I work with. But hopefully I will get the time to actually create videos like these and write these down in documentation and help you, really help you if you want to kind of, if you want to lead a team or you want to be a part of the team and you feel like you guys are clueless, you don't know what's going on and how you organize your stuff, why our software is breaking, why can't we build great software that everyone else, can follow. Keep going with these series, of standards, and ask me questions. Tell me, hey man, how do you do pair programming? How do you collect requirements? All the way up from the moment, like, as I believe that there's a tri-nature of everything, the standard basically governs the engineers, the engineered, and the engineering. So the engineers that are working on the product, and the engineered, which is the product itself, and then the engineering process, which is the process of from gathering requirements and getting business into your company to start making more money all the way down until you deliver it, and start marketing it and taking it to the next level. A lot of these ideas are still living in my head. They're not everywhere, but or anywhere, but I will try to share as much as I can, as much time allows. And again, please forgive me for the long videos. There's so many things that I want to show you, so many things I want to share with you, but we are limited with the time and space. And hopefully we'll get the chance to kind of share all that stuff with you. Again, if you actually were able to watch this video all the way until the end, thank you so very much for your patience. You must be a very, very patient person to stay all that journey with me. But also additionally, I hope you found this useful. I hope you find this very inspiring and fulfilling for you. And hopefully you can take it and implement it in real life. And as usual, if you have any questions or comments or concerns, please feel free to reach out at any point in time. Drop a comment in the comment section. Reach out to me through social media or emails or however you want to reach out to me. As usual, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video. Thank you.